to Leaders Recon. I'm your host, Joshua Carr, and today we have Mr. Sutton with us to talk about the Montgomery GI Bill as part of this education series. Sir, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, it's kind of an elephant in the room, the Montgomery GI Bill. There's so many facets to it. Can you kind of give us an overview, just real quickly, over the different facets of the Montgomery GI Bill, and then we'll kind of focus in on the pieces that are most relevant to
Sure.
Guardsmen?
There are several different programs that fall under the GI Bill. There are programs for active duty, programs for reserve components, including the National Guard. There are programs for wounded warriors, for family members who are survivors. So there's a lot of different education programs that fall under the umbrella of GI Bill. There are three main programs that military members, that serving members usually have access to, and that's the Montgomery GI Bill for active duty, or Chapter 30 program, the Montgomery GI Bill for selected reserve, which is the Chapter 1606 program,
Okay.
and then the big dog, the post 9/11 GI Bill.
Which is, I feel like, what we hear a lot about in
We
the
do
news,
hear
yeah.
a lot about that one, yes. That one gets a lot of press.
And so I guess before we dive into the facets of the pieces of the GI Bill, can we what do you do here? Are you overseeing that program, or?
Yeah, so I'm the GI Bill program manager for the Army National Guard, and what I do is I oversee the state education offices when they're processing GI Bill transactions, making soldiers eligible for different GI Bill programs. I also write policy for GI Bill for the Army National Guard. I write legislation.
So you're really the guy we need to talk to about this.
I would be one of them. Yes, yes. There's one of us in every service. So.
All right. So, kind of you highlighted a couple of the different pieces here. I guess that 1606, I believe, is like probably the piece that we wanted to focus on at the beginning here.
Mm-hmm.
Just like talking about the GI Bill for the average guardsman.
Yes.
That's how I think of it in my mind. Like, for the average guardsman, how do I qualify? Can you give us an overview, like, what are some of the things that, initially qualify you for service, and like, how would I go about using that?
Sure. Well, the Chapter 1606 GI Bill was unique when it was first passed. It was the first time that reserve component members were eligible for an education benefit. The GI Bill dates all the way back to the Soldiers and Sailors Readjustment Act of 1944, but Guard members and reservists weren't eligible for any education benefit until July 1st, 1985, which is when the Chapter 1606 or Montgomery GI Bill Selected Reserve Program began. So it was pretty forward thinking for its time to allow reserve component soldiers to have an education benefit. And basically, to become eligible, you have to have a 6-year contract, a 6-year obligation in the Guard of the Reserves.
I don't have to have served it, just have the
You have to have the obligation. You don't have to complete it yet.
Okay. But
you do have to have completed a high school diploma or the equivalent, a GED, or barring that, 12 credits of college. And you have to complete your initial active duty for training, basic training, and AIT. So once you complete all three of those, you become eligible to receive this entitlement.
And so what is that entitlement right now?
So for this year, currently, it pays $407 a month for students who are attending full-time. It gets prorated if you're attending less than full-time. You get about half of that if you're attending half-time, all the way down to quarter.
So $407 a month just as a stipend, or
just as a stipend?
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't go to the school. It goes directly to you, and you can use it for whatever you want to. You can use it for books if you need that. If you need to pay some fees, if you need to buy lunch while you're on campus, it's for anything, any costs that you would have that are related to pursuing your degree.
So this is just like the most basic version, I guess, of the education benefits.
Pretty much, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's right now, 2022. $407 a month.
Yeah, it goes up every year in October. There's a pretty complicated formula to determine how much it goes up. Some years it goes up $1 or $2. Some years it goes up $10 or $12 a month. So yeah, it does go up every year. It's funny. I mean, inflation is something we're all talking about right now. But there is one upside. The higher inflation is, the more this payment goes up.
Yeah.
So.
$407 a month. All I need to do to qualify is do my initial military training and have a contract that's at least 6 years long.
That's it.
So that I guess that if from my point of view, not being an education specialist like yourself, right? Like, I think of that as like, okay, basically, you know, I enter the Guard, I qualify for this. Going to those next steps now, right, as we start to talk about the more complicated pieces of the GI Bill, you know, I guess can we walk through, like, okay, so let's say I've done my initial military training and now,
How do I get my money?
yeah, like, how does that happen?
That's a question
right?
we get all the time. So basically, there are a couple of things that you'd need to do. The first thing is, as soon as you get back from training, you might want to talk to your education counselor, education office in your state, just to make sure they're aware that you've returned so that they can code your eligibility and let the VA know that you're eligible.
Okay.
What you need to do when you're ready to go to school, you'll need to apply for a certificate of eligibility with the VA. You can do that on the va.gov website.
Okay.
There's a place that says apply for education benefits. It's a pretty friendly form, walks you through the steps. Takes about 15 minutes to fill it out, and once you submit that, the VA will then take your information, they'll determine what your eligibility status is, and they'll send you a certificate of eligibility.
So, and that's all online?
That's all done online.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually now recently, just in the last 2 years, the VA has started emailing those certificate eligibility. They used to send them in the mail, so you had to wait for the post office to get it to you. But now, so we're hearing people receiving their certificate of eligibility in as little as a week.
Okay.
So
that's pretty quick.
It can happen pretty quickly, yes. Average is about 2 weeks right now. And then after that, you'll need to go register with your school. So you register for classes, and then you need to talk to your VA certifying official. This is a school employee who does certifications for the VA. Sometimes they're in the bursar's office or a financial aid office. Sometimes they're in a veteran's office. It really depends school to school. And they'll certify that you're enrolled in the school. And once those two pieces, your eligibility from the VA and your enrollment certification, once those meet up in the VA database, the VA will start sending you your checks.
And will they backdate that to like when you started?
They'll backdate it to your first eligibility date or your first date of school.
Okay.
So if you attend a whole semester before you ever even go to va.gov and apply, it's when you apply it at va.gov. But if you applied and got your certificate of eligibility 3 years ago and you're just now starting school, then you'll get paid for your first semester that you're starting school. You have to be enrolled in school to receive the payment.
So so what you're saying, get your certificate of eligibility before you go.
Get your certificate of eligibility, get it out of the way, put it someplace safe, so that you have it.
Is there any like hiccups that you typically see soldiers struggle with through that process, or like what's the most common thing that would cause delays in getting that certificate of eligibility?
There are a few. We try to keep our technology up to date, but we've had some issues over the last couple of years with our particular data systems and how they talk to the VA, and sometimes the information just doesn't get there. What we ask the soldiers to do is go ahead and do your certificate of eligibility. If you get denied, let us know. Contact your state education service officer and let them know you got a denial letter and you think that you're eligible. They can go in and they can fix it right then.
Okay.
If they can't fix it, we have a team that works exclusively GI Bill, and they're our liaison with the VA. They work with the VA directly to make sure that eligibility is done. So if you get denied, it's not the end of the world, but do contact somebody in your state, your education officer.
Is there anything that soldiers typically do, though, that would cause them to get denied that's like a soldier mistake, though? Like if I'm going to go apply, right, because I haven't gotten my certificate yet. So if I go to apply to get my certificate, you know, what are things that you would be like, hey, just make sure you don't jack this up?
There's a few things on the application process that asks, one of the things that it asks that's confusing is if you're part of the National Call to Service program. And a lot of people think, well, I was called to service. But that's a particular education program that very few people qualify for. So if it asks if you're a National Call to Service program, and nobody's ever said that you're part of the National Call to Service program, make sure you tick no on that one. The other one is applying for an incorrect benefit. If you're applying for the Montgomery GI Bill Selected Reserve, but you request another GI Bill program, the VA is going to look at what you request, not necessarily what you're actually eligible for. So they may deny you having requested for the wrong program. Again, though, those type of things, if those things happen, it'll show up on your certificate of eligibility or your denial letter. You can go talk to your education service officer in your state, and we can get that taken care of for you.
So that kind of leads me into my next question, which was like, okay, let's say I'm not really 100% sure what I'm eligible for. I do have to apply for each of the individual programs before, though. Like if I just applied for the Reserve Select in the 1606 chapter, but I was actually eligible for more, they're not going to tell me that.
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
It depends. It kind of depends on who processes your case. Most of this is done now with just data matching.
Okay.
The reason it happens so quickly is that for most of the applications, the data just matches in the background, and the computer spits it out, and a human doesn't even have to touch it. For those times when there is some confusion about it, then there's a case processor at the VA who'll look at it, and they will grant you eligibility for the most advantageous program.
Okay.
So if you're eligible for 2 programs, which is kind of unique amongst the Guard, most active duty members are only eligible for 1. It's only in the Guard that we can have multiple programs that we're eligible for. But if you happen to be eligible for multiple programs, there's a person at the VA who will look at it and will grant you eligibility for the most advantageous program.
So then, talking about other programs, you know, can we dive into that a little bit?
Sure.
Like, so I know, you know, one of the things I've heard of a lot thrown around is the GI Bill kicker. What is that?
So a kicker is just an additional payment on top of your $407 a month.
Okay.
But that's an incentive. The $407 a month for Chapter 1606, that's an entitlement. You meet the 3 eligibility requirements.
And then it's just done.
And it's done. That's kind of a thank you gift. Thank you for doing your service. Here's some money for school. The kicker is an incentive. We're trying to encourage you to do something that you may or may not have thought about doing before.
Okay.
So the first thing is we've got several different classes of kickers. We've got our accession kickers for people who are just coming to the Guard, either from the general population or from prior service. For those, you've got to come into a critical MOS, and that's an MOS that we typically have shortages in, or are in units that are going to be deploying fairly soon, those type of things.
And how would I know?
Those will be handled, those are all handled at MEPS. When you do your recruiting, when you go to sign up for a job, they'll have lists. They do change because the needs of the Guard change. So every month there's an updated list of what MOSs are critical in what states. So we don't really keep, it doesn't do us much good to keep lists of these because they change so often.
Okay.
So all that data is sent directly to MEPS, and MEPS has those lists, and they can look it up on the day that an applicant's on the floor ready to come in. You still have to do your 6-year obligation. You still have to complete your training. But what that gets you is an additional payment. For this year, for fiscal year 22, it's an extra $200 a month for non-prior service and prior service accessions, people just coming into the Guard.
So that's just initial entry, though.
That's just initial entry. We also have kickers for re-enlistment. If you're a member of the Guard and you've been in for at least 3 continuous years and you didn't get a kicker when you first came in, you can sign for a re-enlistment kicker. Okay. Now, both all 3 of those type of kickers, there's an ASVAB requirement. You've got to have an ASVAB of at least 50. So if you don't meet the ASVAB requirement of 50 when you're coming in, you've got 3 years to do some training, do some classes, and retake that and get your score above a 50. The re-enlistment kicker is $350 a month. So that's $350 on top of your 407. Now we're starting to talk about some money that can really make a difference.
So with that kicker, though, like, so let's say, you know, getting ready to re-enlist, right? And I want to get a kicker as part of my re-enlistment, right? Is it MOS specific, or still critical?
They're not MOS specific for re-enlistment.
Okay, so it's just, so I want to make sure I have a kicker with my re-enlistment.
Right. So we've already paid for your schooling. So now we want to reap some of the benefits as the service by getting you to re-enlist in that same job.
Well, and I guess that was my question, but let's say I'm not like necessarily planning on going to college this year, right? Or maybe it's going to be a couple years. Like, if I get that kicker in my re-enlistment, like, is it a certificate of eligibility, or like when can I use that? Or is it only if I'm going to school right now?
Well, you can only use it when you're going to school, but you can contract for the kicker. So you can sign the kicker contract when you re-enlist, but you don't have to go to school right away. Once you meet your eligibility requirements, unless you violate a couple of contract points, you remain eligible for both the 1606 and the kicker for your entire term of service as long as you stay in the Guard. Yeah.
So that's kind of a nice. I mean, that's kind of a huge piece, because like you're saying, right?
Yeah. So like I joined the Guard, and became eligible for 1606, but I didn't go to school to work on my master's degree for 6 years. So I'd already been in 6 years before I ever started using my education benefit.
And then you did the kicker, I'm assuming?
I didn't get a kicker because I wasn't in one of those MOSs that was considered critical at the time. But for those who do get the kicker, it's a good benefit. We also do kickers for officer commissioning programs.
Yeah, what does that look like?
So if you're currently an enlisted soldier, you've completed AIT, you're MOS qualified, and you decide you want to become an officer, we can then, if you don't already have a kicker, we can contract you for a kicker, again, $350 a month while you're completing your schooling to get your bachelor's degree that's required to become an officer.
And that's just something the soldiers need to, again, talk to their state program,
Either the state education officer or their unit admins. So the kicker contracts are done at reenlistment. So they're either done by the recruiting and retention battalion, recruiting and retention NCO, or by their unit administrators when they're signing their reenlistment documents.
Okay. So then what about officers in general? So, right, if I'm ROTC, whatever, is there any sort of kickers that are related to officers? I know we've talked enlisted soldiers, which is most soldiers that are going to be using this. But
so we have one type of kicker for officers who've already commissioned. So all of our officer commissioning kickers, ROTC, OCS, Warrant Officer Candidate School, those have to be contracted for before you commission. Once you commission, you've got a brief window of about 1 year that you can also receive a kicker, an officer commissioning kicker. Because if you come in and go straight to OCS or straight to ROTC and you don't go through the whole enlisted process before converting, we still want to give you an opportunity because you're going to want to continue your schooling after you commission. So within 1 year of your commissioning date, you can sign we call it our standard officer kicker. And again, that's $350 a month on top of your Chapter 1606.
It's almost like something that's like, you should do that, right? Like somebody should tell you that, right? As you, like when you're commissioning.
There's no reason not to.
Like,
you know, I mean, when you commission, we're pretty sure that you're going to serve at least 6 years. So let's sign the obligation, get you the kicker, and then it's there.
Yeah. Is there any ADSO that comes along with that, or with the
just
kickers?
Just the 6-year obligation.
Yeah. So really, there's like almost no reason. Like somebody should have told me this when I signed up.
Right. Almost no reason not to. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's is there anything else about kickers though that we should kind of dive into?
Those are the basics.
Okay.
Yeah. A couple of things that you need to know about 1606 and kicker. Obviously, these are selected reserve kickers, so you have to be a member of the selected reserve. If you go inactive National Guard or IRR, we have to suspend your payments. We can't pay you while you're not in an active drilling status. If you decide to go AGR, we also have to suspend your payments because you become eligible for other GI Bill programs at that time. So, but stay a traditional drilling reservist, come to drill, do your job, you get to keep this benefit.
Which is pretty nice, honestly. Like if you stack them both, it's like, okay, now we're talking.
Yeah, we're starting to talk some good money.
So the big fish in the room, right? The post 9/11 GI Bill. Can we talk through this and like what it means for guardsmen? And I know there's a lot of facets to it. So
there's a lot of eligibility requirements for post 9/11 GI Bill. The biggest one that gets the Guard members, it's primarily active duty soldiers or active duty service members who become eligible. But in the Guard, there's a couple of categories. If you are an AGR, either Title 32 or Title 10 AGR, you can gain eligibility for post 9/11. If you deploy as a Guard member, the time that you're deployed is qualifying service. And then under Title 32 ADOS, there's 4 very special categories, very time periods that qualify. And the way the law reads, there's a whole set of it has to be a national emergency declared by the president, supported by federal funds. There's 4 periods of service that meet those. There's the period of Operation Noble Eagle, 2001 to 2002, the 59th inaugural between January and May of 2022. If you worked on COVID support or COVID relief mission, anytime from March of 2020, and that just ended this July 1st of 2022. And then if you worked on the southwest border between February of 2019 and January of 2021. Those are all qualifying service for post 9/11 as well.
So primarily deployments.
For the guard, for guard members, primarily deployments, and then those 4 special missions.
So, but if you're part of these, like, what are what are the levels? Because I
Sure.
know that there's levels for percentages, and then what's like that total entitlement look like if I did get to 100%? Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, so post 9/11 works different than the other GI Bills. With Chapter 1606, once you're eligible, you get a single monthly payment. Boom. With post 9/11, you gain eligibility for the number of days of service that you do.
Okay.
So you have to do at least 90 days of qualifying service. It doesn't have to be in a row. It can be a day at a time. It can be a week. It could be 90 days in a row. But once you hit that 90th day of qualifying service, you become eligible. And as you do more service, up to 3 full years, 36 months of service, your eligibility is prorated. It starts at a 50% payment tier, goes up to 100%. And what that means is that rather than a single lump monthly payment, post 9/11 pays out 3 separate payments. And if you were at the 90 days of service or 50% payment tier, you would get 50% of each of those 3 payments. There's a tuition stipend that goes directly to your school.
Okay.
Pays up to 100% of in-state tuition at any public university.
Any public university.
Any public university.
No dollar limit or anything?
No dollar limit. I think right now New York has the highest public university tuition, and it'll pay up to 100%. If you're at that 50% payment tier, it'll pay 50%.
Okay.
It also pays a book and supply stipend of up to $1,000 per academic year. And then there's a monthly housing allowance, which is what makes this a really popular GI Bill.
What is that monthly housing allowance?
So the monthly housing allowance depends on where you're going to school. It's based on the BAH rate for an E5 with dependents. Doesn't matter what your rank is, doesn't matter if you have dependents or not. That's just the table that they use.
Okay.
At the zip code where you're attending school.
So I can figure that out if I'm just like, hey, E5 with dependent on some online calculator.
Yep. Or
50% or whatever the percentage is that I qualify.
The VA has actually built a tool to help you calculate that.
Really?
It's called the GI Bill Comparison Tool. The website address is really, really long, but if you just Google GI Bill Comparison Tool, it'll take you right to it. And you can put in things like how much qualifying service do you have, everywhere between 90 days and 36 months. Are you currently on qualifying active duty, or are you a drilling reservist, or are you a veteran? Where are you going to go to school? And you can pull up your exact school, and it'll tell you this is what it'll pay for tuition based on what you put in. This is what you get for books. This is what you'll get for housing allowance. A personal note, my wife was using post 9/11 GI Bill to work on her master's, and we had a choice of 3 different schools. And one of them was Peabody Conservatory up in Baltimore, which is a really highly ranked music school. And we thought, well, she'd like to go there for a master's, but that's just way out of our league, and it's,
Yeah.
So we thought, well, let's see what it's going to cost. We went onto the GI Bill comparison tool, looked at the 3 schools, and realized that after applying the tuition benefit and the housing allowance and the book allowance, going to Peabody Conservatory at Johns Hopkins was going to be really affordable.
So how does that, so let's say I'm not going to, like your example is perfect because that's what I was getting ready to ask about. So let's say I'm not going to a public university, right? I'm going to some
private
sort of
school.
Private school. Then how is it calculated? Like what so let's say I'm at 50%. I just did my 90 days. I'm at 50%. How do I determine what that payment's going to be, since it is a...
So the tuition pays 100% of public tuition, or there's an annual cap for private or foreign schools.
Okay.
You decide you want to go overseas and go to school. The cap it changes every year. This year it's just over $26,000 in tuition that it'll pay. Now, obviously,
and that's 100%.
That's for the 100%
Okay.
rate. So if you're at the 50% rate, it'll be around $13,000. Obviously, a lot of private colleges and universities, they're a lot more than $26,000 for tuition. So the VA has another program that'll help you pay that tuition difference. It's called the Yellow Ribbon Program. And it's a voluntary scholarship program that the school enters in with the VA, where if there's any tuition left over, the school will agree to pay a portion. The VA will match that portion up to half of the difference in tuition.
Talking about that Yellow Ribbon Program, because I don't think, so there's a whole series of podcasts, but I don't think we've talked about that piece of it yet. Can you kind of expound on what that is?
Sure. So the Yellow Ribbon Program is a voluntary program that the schools and the VAs enter into together. And what happens is, let's say your tuition is $36,000 a year,
Okay.
and you're at a private school. The VA is going to pay $26,000 a year. That leaves you $10,000 that you've got to find a way to pay for. Well, with the Yellow Ribbon Program, the school can agree to basically give you a scholarship to pay some of that delta, some of that difference, and the VA will match. So in our example, where you had a $10,000 difference, if the school decides to kick in an additional $3,000, the VA will match that $3,000. Now your $10,000 is down to $4,000 that you've got to pay for it. It's not bad at all.
And how would I determine like if the school has those agreements in place?
That would be your school certifying official.
Okay.
That would
There's no
know.
way to tell that ahead of time, really.
The GI Bill comparison tool does tell whether or not schools are yellow ribbon, but the yellow ribbon scholarships themselves vary from school to school.
Okay.
There are some places where there's 5 scholarships available and they're $5,000 a piece. There are other schools that every veteran who needs the yellow ribbon is eligible for up to half of the difference.
Oh, wow.
It just depends on the school.
And I just have to dive into the school.
You just have to dive into the school. If you're going to a private school and you know you're going to have some leftover tuition, ask your school certifying official if they do yellow ribbon.
Oh, I'm learning so much here. I'm like thinking about my master's, like, oh man, this
Yes.
is more affordable. So, going back to some of those percentages though, as we go back into the qualifying service. So you said 90 days, 50%.
That's your basic eligibility. Yep.
In like 6 months is
6 months, you go up to 60%.
okay.
And then your next tier is at 18 months. Then you
Okay.
go to 70%. And then from there, every 6 months of qualifying service takes you another 10%. It takes 36 months of qualifying service to get to the full 100%.
Now, I was hearing some rumor about there being like a piece of this where like once you got to 24 months, then like other parts of service count in, like your
Yes.
initial. How does that? Can you talk me through that?
So initially, your initial active duty for training, your basic training and AIT, are not considered qualifying service because that's training time. However, once you get to 24 months of other qualifying service, 2 deployments if you're in the Guard, for example, then your basic training and AIT time can be added on top of that. So if you have an MOS where you've got your 3 months or 2 months of basic training and a 4-month AIT, once you hit that 24-month mark, now you immediately go to 30 months. You get that additional 6 months of qualifying service.
And that's just initial entry training,
That's
right?
just initial entry training, right?
Okay.
Right.
So that's good to know though, because I feel like
Yes.
it's an incentive to be like, hey,
It does. It makes a big difference, and there's a lot of people, like you were saying, that don't realize that this happens, and then all of a sudden they get to this point and they get a big bonus of qualifying service. So it's a good surprise, but sometimes it is a surprise.
So just to recap then, where we're at with post 9/11, I need to serve at least 90 days, either on a deployment or one of the 4 specialized mission sets that you mentioned, right? Or I'm an AGR. I mean, that's a really small subset of soldiers. So one of those 2 things that qualifies me for 50%. That 50% is either in-state tuition for public universities, or $26,000 as of 2022 for private universities.
Correct.
And then $1,000 a month, $1,000 a year of book stipend, right?
Yeah.
And BAH.
Monthly housing allowance.
Sorry, monthly housing allowance. And I can find all that in that VA comparison tool, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
so basically if you go in, if you know what school or what couple schools you might want to be attending, you can put that school in along with all of your service data, and it will tell you this is the amount of tuition that'll get paid, this is the amount of books that you'll get if you attend full time, this is the monthly housing allowance that you'll receive.
Yeah, we'll grab a link to that and include it in the video so that people can find it super easy. So that's 9/11 in a nutshell, right?
It's a pretty big nutshell.
What are some of the other chapters then of 9/11? I know that we're kind of diving into like really small subsets of people, but is there any of them that we should highlight here?
So kind of the main meat of GI Bill is the Chapter 30 GI Bill, or the Montgomery GI Bill for active duty.
Okay.
This one is just like the 1606 is for the Guard. This one is for active duty soldiers. You have to do at least 2 years on active duty.
Does that count AGRs as well?
That counts AGRs as
Okay.
well.
So that's who our target
Yeah,
is.
that's
okay.
who our target. Yeah, and you have to make an initial contribution of $1,200. So you have. This is the only program where you have to actually buy into the program.
Okay.
And then you become eligible, just like with Chapter 1606, you become eligible for a monthly payment. This year, it's $2,150 a month if you're going full time. So around $9,000 a semester.
It's not bad.
Not bad at all. For an initial $1,200 investment, that's a pretty good return.
And to qualify for this, it's how many years of?
You have to have a minimum of 2 years on active duty. You have to have your high school diploma or equivalent completed, and make it a contribution of $1,200.
So you have a lot of soldiers who serve these like ADOS tours in various capacities. I mean, because we have, our manning is so low. So do those count towards this or no?
Those don't for Chapter 30.
Okay.
Chapter 30 is strictly active duty, and it's continuous service.
Okay.
There is a mobilization contingency in there, but you've got to be mobilized 730 continuous days on a single set of orders.
Oh my.
And we just don't do those anymore. Our mobilizations are limited to 400 days now, so we don't see those type of eligibilities.
20, was that like 20 some month deployment?
Yeah, it'll be a 24-month deployment.
Dang.
Yeah.
So smaller subset of soldiers, but there is a program
There
out
are
there.
for the Guard. It's generally going to be your AGRs that become eligible for Chapter 30.
And can you stack any of these together? So like, let's say I qualify for post 9/11, right? Like I've done a deployment. I qualify, let's just say 50%, right? I qualify for my 50%. I'm also in AGR, right? Or I've taken an AGR job now. Like, can I stack now that monthly stipend from the Chapter 33 and my post 9/11 or no?
You can't use them at the same time.
Okay.
So what you get is you get up to 36 months of benefit from any one GI Bill program, 1606, 30, post 9/11. You have a lifetime maximum of 48 months from a combination of programs.
Okay.
So a typical scenario for a Guard member is that you come in, you join the Guard, you become eligible for 1606. Okay, you now have 36 months of Chapter 1606 eligibility. Then into your career, you do a deployment, and now you're eligible for post 9/11. You're now eligible for 2 benefits. You could get 36 months of Chapter 1606. You could get 36 months of post 9/11. You can't use them at the same time. If you combine the benefits, you can use up to 48 months. So you could use 12 months of 1606 and 36 months of post 9/11.
So I should probably, just me looking at it from the soldier viewpoint, I'm like over here. So like if I've already used a bunch of my 1606, then I'm super limited what I can use.
You are. We
Okay.
do see that. If let's say you've used 20 months of your 1606, even though you could be eligible for 36 months of post 9/11, you still are subject to that lifetime cap. So 20 months of 1606, 28 months of post 9/11. And
So just something for soldiers to know,
just
though.
something to be aware of, yes. Because there are other things about post 9/11 to keep in mind as well. I know we haven't talked about transferring yet.
Yeah, that was next on the list.
I figured
right?
that question was coming up, because the biggest benefit on post 9/11 that people see is the ability to transfer your benefit to your dependents. It's still your benefit. You still own it, but you can give your dependents, your spouse or your children, adopted children, stepchildren, foster kids, wards of the court. You can give them permission to use your GI Bill. It's like you have a GI Bill credit card and you go, here you go, Junior, go get some schooling.
And are there any requirements to when you can transfer? Or?
There are. You have to be currently actively serving, either on active duty or in the Guard and Reserve.
Okay.
So go into your monthly drills. You have to complete 6 years of service. You have to agree to serve 4 more continuous years of service from the day that you request your transfer. And that's a really, really important point. So if you request your transfer today, you have to commit to serving 4 continuous years in an active component. You can't go inactive. You can't get out. You've got to serve those 4 years. If you don't complete the 4 years, this is where people get into a lot of trouble with it. first, we have to take away your transfer benefit. We have to take that away from your dependents. Not allowed to keep it because you have to do the 4 years. But second, if during that 4 years, any of your dependents have used benefits and then you don't complete your service obligation, the VA is going to take 100% of the money back. And that's a big deal because right now, the average benefit is $39,000 on post 9/11. That's what the average person uses. So if you transfer to your child, they used $39,000 of benefit, and then you leave the service before completing your service obligation, both you and your child are obligated to pay that money back until it's all paid. And that's a very unwelcome letter to get, especially for a kid who's just graduating college and trying to find their first job, and now they find out they've got a debt for almost 40 grand to the U.S. government. So I can't stress enough, the two things about transferring that are the most important. The first is transfer as soon as you're eligible. You can transfer it all out to your dependents, and if you decide later on you want to go to school yourself, you can pull some of those months back. It's always
That's
your
what
benefit.
I was wondering. I was like, so like, let's say I'm in the same boat, right? I hit 6 years of service the other day.
There you go.
Like last year, I think. So I'm like, so if I say I want to transfer it, right, to my daughter now, but then I decide I want to go get my master's later, right? Can I pull it back, or
you can.
And then do I have to retransfer it though?
You don't have to retransfer.
Okay.
So what you can do, you can transfer as little as 1 month and as many as the number of months you have eligible,
Okay.
up to 36 months, to one or all of your dependents who are still eligible. There's a couple of rules for eligible dependents. Spouses, obviously, you have to be currently married to the spouse, and the spouse has to be under you in DEERS. For children, they have to be under 18, or if they're between 18 and 23, a full-time student. Once a child turns 23, you can't transfer to them anymore.
Okay.
They fall out of DEERS at that point, and that's the requirement for children. They have to be in DEERS. So if you have a newborn or a 1 or 2 year old, go ahead and get the transfer done and get that education benefit secured for them. The spouse can begin using it as soon as you're approved. And that's where we run into issues sometimes with the service obligation. The spouse can start using it right away. The child can begin using it once you've completed 10 years of service. The child turns 18 and has not yet turned 26.
Okay.
So children have a window between age 18 or high school diploma completion and age 26.
Okay. So high school diploma or 18, and that's
whichever comes first. I had 2 kids. One graduated high school at 17 and started using it right away. One decided not to graduate high school and went to college at age 18, and once she turned 18 was able to use it.
Okay.
So 18 or high school diploma, whichever comes first.
nice.
But after they turn 26, they can't receive payment at all.
So we've kind of gotten a well-rounded view, I think, or at least I have a more well-rounded view of the GI Bill and the various programs associated with it. When it comes to where should soldiers look for resources, I know you mentioned the comparison tool. You mentioned the VA website for applications for eligibility. What are some other great resources out there to either help people get connected to their point of contacts in their state, or kind of deep dives into some of these programs?
Yeah, every state has an education service office as part of the National Guard, and every office has an education service officer. Most states also have a dedicated GI Bill manager in their state. Your education service officer or your GI Bill manager in your state will be able to answer any questions you have. They can look up your particular information about eligibility for any of the GI Bill programs. They can guide you through the process of applying, answer questions about transferring. If you have transferred, they can tell you when your service obligation end date is.
They're really the go-to.
They're going to be your go-to. They're going to be your first line of defense in getting your education. And you can find a list of education offices on nationalguard.com. If you go to nationalguard.com and find your state, on those state pages, about halfway down, there's a link to your education office.
Nice.
So you can get contact information for your education office.
And any other resources that you recommend?
Those are the best ones. You can also call the VA. They have a toll-free number at 888 GI Bill 1. They can answer some questions for you as well. Keep in mind that the VA has to answer questions for all the service components. So they're limited on what the information they have for a National Guard, Army National Guard member. So your state education office is going to be your best stop.
Best person. And then, do you have any messages that you want to give out to the audience, like specifically? I know we kind of hit on some of the things you emphasize. But...
Use your benefits. They're there for you. Between the Army National Guard budget and the VA office, these are funded, they're available. Use them up. You don't have to go to a traditional university. You can also use them for an apprenticeship. If you want to go into the trades, let's say you want to be an electrician, you can use your GI Bill to take your certification exams. And you can use your GI Bill while you're going through your journeyman process as an apprentice.
Oh, really?
You can use it for on-the-job training. In my state, we had a program with the state police where people could go to the state police academy and use their GI Bill to fund their tuition at the state police academy. And then their first 2 years on the job as a trooper, they were receiving GI Bill payments for on-the-job training.
Oh,
So you can use it for more than just traditional school. We get caught up in traditional school, traditional 4-year college degree, because that's kind of the easiest to explain. But apprenticeships are out there for people who would rather go into the trades. On-the-job training for those. Licenses and certifications. If you want to be a mechanic and you need to become ACE certified, the GI Bill will help you pay for that certification exam.
Wow.
If you're in the aircraft industry and you want to become airframe and power plant certified, the GI Bill will help you pay for those A&P exams.
So what about, like, if your people are going and they want to get their pilot's license and stuff, is that something that you would recommend trying to do through like GI programs or through credentialing assistance?
If you really want to do that, you can do that with GI Bill as well. GI Bill will help you pay for flight training. Yeah, the GI Bill will help you pay for the groundwork, basically.
Really?
All your in-class stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Well, thanks, sir, for coming on.
Sure, thanks for having me.
I appreciate you coming back on the program. And
as you can see, this is a topic that I love to talk about. I've been doing this for about 15 years, and I just love it.
Well, I'm glad that you're diving into the weeds on it, because I'm learning everything for the first time. So
and it's important that you say that there are a lot of weeds. There's not really a one-size-fits-all answer. Every answer is going to be different depending on the individual soldier, their service criteria, and frankly, what your goals are for your education.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks again, sir.
You're very welcome.
If you would like more information on any of the topics discussed today, please visit our social media pages in the links below. Tune in to Leaders Recon over the next few weeks as we bring in today's leaders and pioneers to discuss their experiences, share their wisdom, and help you grow as a leader. If you like this episode of Leaders Recon, please don't forget to subscribe below and leave us a 5-star review. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.